Gerhard Wisnewski on the Russia-Ukraine war. As with 9/11, the truth is 180 degrees opposite.
And from this, it follows that this war has been prepared long ago, but not only or not by the Russians, but for years by the Americans. There are regular studies which they have made how to bring Russia out of balance. Yes, of course, in the very first place, you have to say goodbye to the established media. If you don't, then you can only partially listen to them, I would say in small doses, in order to know what is going on there, what is being lied about and twisted. It's important to know that, but you can no longer use them as a source of information that you trust. Instead, it is imperative to switch to alternative media and to deal with it there and to free oneself from all this propaganda.
Mr. Wisnewski, welcome. I welcome you to our interview at KLA TV. Briefly, for our viewers who may not yet know you, as far as I know, you were the first German journalist to question the official reporting of politics and the leading media on the attack of September 11th, 2001 in the USA. And of course, not only this coverage, but also the resulting war on the terror launched by the US administration. At that time, that was a huge, groundbreaking step that also triggered a questioning and rethinking among many people. I would say that it awakened an investigative spirit. And that brings us to today's topic. Currently, we are being sworn in, I would say, by politics and the leading media to a Russia-Ukraine war narrative. At this time, too, we are facing serious consequences. Well, Mr. Wisnewski, since we have such an investigative sleuth like you in front of the camera, we would, of course, be very interested to know what your assessment of this is. Is it possible that there are completely different connections, backgrounds, intentions, strategies, puppeteers and profiteers here, perhaps similar to 9/11, than what is being painted before our eyes by politics and the leading media?
Yes, of course, there's a huge gap between the official media version and the truth. Here, Putin is sold to us as the bad guy, the evil Russians, and so they attacked Ukraine. I don't want to defend the Russians any further. I don't necessarily believe that Putin is a choir boy. But the fact is that the Americans have been working towards this military operation for many years. And we must not forget that this war has been going on since 2014. What we have seen now from the end of February 2022 was a new offensive by Russia against Ukraine. And that's what the Americans have been working towards for years. They've been pouring billions into Ukraine to train and educate the military there. They have also written papers, studies in which they have already anticipated this war. In fact, they really wanted this war. And why actually? And that's what the public is not being told here, of course, that the US absolutely wanted this war. Because if you look at the list of the benefits that the US is getting from this war, you just can't finish. I have something very exclusive here, namely an excerpt from my new yearbook, which I'm currently working on. I've put together this whole list, which I unfortunately don't know by heart. What does the USA actually get out of this war? You have to take a look at that. We are always told what the Russians benefit from the war. Maybe they have some benefit from the war. Maybe they want to protect themselves from further NATO advance. All this is possible. But if you look at this list here, what do the US and NATO get out of this new military offensive by the Russians? So there we have here distraction and explanation of other problems like inflation, economic crisis, cover-up of corona crimes, so mainly distraction. Directing the anger at all this at Putin, so at the price increase, inflation. Disciplining of citizens, a regime of fear, the justification of anti-democratic measures. If necessary, we may even be threatened with an emergency regime. the rehabilitation of President Zelensky from a corrupt politician to a hero. Zelensky is passed around the world as a superhero and it is no longer allowed to contradict him. Then improving Ukraine's chances of joining the EU and NATO, also a first priority goal of the US, strengthening the US leadership role. When you mentioned earlier 9/11, 2001, we had almost the same thing. That is, with September 11th, the US brought NATO back in line at the time. I still remember how Colin Powell marched into NATO headquarters at that time with pompous air, according to the motto, "Everything now listens to our command." And we have that effect here as well. Then what else do we have? So I can't even finish. Then, of course, that now instead of Russian gas, American gas is being bought by the EU and Germany. Also, business background. A huge arms deal. As you can see, I'm not going to be able to finish here. That's really about 30 points. And the Americans have been eagerly waiting for Putin to finally let himself be provoked to the point where he invades Ukraine. Now they're screaming and scrambling around, but in reality the champagne corks have been popping in Washington and in the defense industry and elsewhere in the gas industry. The American one, yes. That's the way it really goes. And as usual, everything is twisted 180 degrees.
Mr. Wisnewski, we would be interested to know more about this. What strategies do you see in the background? What's going on there?
Yes, well, in this war, as I may or may not have mentioned, the Russian side is always portrayed as the bad one and as the aggressor. That is very important. You also notice the language regime in politics. They always talk about Putin's war of aggression. That is very important to them, that this is hammered into the people's heads. But of course, I have already done research here for my next book, for my new one, Verheimlicht, Vertuscht, Vergessen, 2023. And from this, it follows that this war has been prepared long ago. But not only, or not by the Russians, but for years by the Americans. There are regular studies which they have made how to bring Russia out of balance. And the script for this war was not written in Russia, but in the United States, which may surprise some people. And what the script looked like could be seen in a report by the military think tank RAND Corporation, 3/4 of which is funded by the American state. That is a state think tank that expresses what the American state wants. And the title of this report really leaves no room for a misunderstanding, which is to overstretch and unbalance Russia. That's been the strategy of the Americans, and that's why Putin did them a huge favor, so to speak, whether he wanted it or not, to finally invade Ukraine at the end of February 2022. And the RAND report that I talked about lists numerous techniques and measures to provoke and threaten Russia, and that was even before Russia invaded Ukraine. For example, some of those steps include the following: repositioning bombers within striking distance of key Russian strategic targets, of course, on the part of NATO and the West. Deployment of additional tactical nuclear weapons at sites in Europe and Asia. Strengthening US and allied naval forces and their presence in Russia's areas of operation. Holding NATO war exercises on Russia's borders. Withdraw from the INF Treaty regarding intermediate nuclear forces, medium-range missiles. And all this was planned before. It was proposed and partly carried out before Russia invaded Ukraine. The question is, what else should Russia have put up with in terms of provocation and threats to its security? The problem really was that the US systematically worked to get the Russian bear in the corner. And they got him in the corner. And what does a bear do when he is cornered? It strikes because it has no other choice. That has been the mechanism of this invasion of Ukraine by the Russians. After all, Ukraine has been a last distance piece towards the West. And the Russians have desperately asked for Ukraine to at least become neutral as a buffer. This was all rejected. The US even said, "We are not listening to the Russians anymore."
But the normal Americans on the street are probably not even aware that there's such think tanks in the background. But probably it's not in the interest of the Americans at all, but in the interest of other puppeteers. Could you please specify this further, Mr. Wisnewski?
Well, as I said, I can only speak of the arms industry, the gas industry, the financial industry, and other such industries. They are all involved. And as far as the points are concerned, these are just the ones. This is a positive list for NATO, the United States, what kind of benefit they get from this war. So, for example, solidarity within NATO, more control over the allies, but also internally, disciplining citizens through a regime of fear. Now, again, it's about whether maybe a nuclear power plant is going to explode and things like that. So, if Putin had not started the war, I think the US was eagerly waiting for, then somehow the United States would have had to do an even tougher provocation to get him to do it. So it is really endless. Then we also have, which is a very important point, the distancing of Germany from Russia. That's what the Anglo-Americans have been fighting about for over 100 years, to drive a wedge between Russia and Germany. They have now managed to do that perfectly. So it's really cutting off almost all economic relations. And Germany is being referred back to the West, economically, raw material-wise, and so on. So this is a strategic war. This is simply a globalist world shaping that is taking place here, and a reorganization of realms. So one wants to bring together the Western realm and the Eastern realm, and Asia then brings itself together all by itself, in the sense of a dialectic process. We see, for example, how Russia and China are moving closer together, and Russia is looking for new trading partners, new customers for its raw materials. So, in other words, these realms will be ordered and delineated more precisely. There will be blocks again and things like that. This is all planned. This is geopolitics.
Now, one more question, perhaps the final one. As an average consumer, you stand in front of this information with your mouth open and full of amazement, but on the whole, you don't know what to do with it, how to deal with it. What would you give us? What would you give the viewers as an advice? How can one counteract this? How can you respond to it? What measures can you take that you don't have to put up with everything like rain and snow, as they say?
Yes, of course, in the very first place, you have to say goodbye to the established media. If you don't, then you can only partially listen to them, I would say in small doses, in order to know what is going on there, what is being lied about and twisted. It's important to know that, but you can no longer use them as a source of information that you trust. Instead, it is imperative to switch to alternative media and to deal with it there, and to free oneself from all this propaganda, because it is also said that the first victim of war is truth. And we have now a spectacular case before us. We now have a war, and people lie like a trooper. We have to be aware of that, and you have to take this opportunity, now that it's so clear, to absolutely separate yourself from this mainstream media and from the mainstream narratives and from the chatter of the politicians.
Mr. Wisnewski, I say thank you very much for taking the time. I would be happy if we could get you in front of the camera again. And I wish you another good day.
Anytime. Thank you very much. Take care.